Welcome to the Launch Family Podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Shelley, former teacher, mom of six, and passionate advocate for modern parenting done with intention, heart, and hope. Today, I'm joined by Kecia Nelson, a licensed clinical social worker with 25 years of experience helping families navigate chronic illness, emotional safety, and healing from childhood emotional neglect. Keisha's mission is to help parents recognize that the most powerful work we can do for our kids often starts within ourselves. In this episode, we'll talk about what it means to parent differently than how we were raised, why emotional health matters more than behavior charts, and how we can heal generational patterns to build strong, authentic relationships with our children. Kecia, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jessica. Thank you so much for having me. Wow, that was a mouthful, but you really said everything. That was perfect.
Yeah, well, I want to dive into your background and give our audience just a little bit more clarity for who you are. So, can you share a little bit more about your background, what led you to the world of parent coaching and emotional wellness as a whole?
So, I was thinking about this the other day. I have always wanted to work with kids, and it's probably because I had some childhood emotional wounding, right? We oftentimes want to help people where we were, hurt in some way. And so I knew going into college that I was wanting to help people, in particular children. And I kind of stumbled around trying to decide, like, would I do psychology? Would I do psychiatry? And then I found social work, which to me was like the perfect blend of everything. And for those of you who don't know what social work is, sort of the premise is that we work with people with where they're at. Like, we work with people in their environment, and it's not, to me, it's not as kind of pathologizing as some of the other areas of focus where we take people and where they live and who they, know and all of that into account. And so it was kind of the perfect fit for me. And I knew that I could do clinical work with that degree. And so I got my master's in social work. And when I was in college, I did an internship in healthcare and pediatrics. And that, like, I kind of fell in love with that. And I work with parents who have children that have chronic disease and life threatening illness. And so there's clearly a lot of mental health involved in that, having a child with a chronic illness that impacts the whole family. It's not just the disease, the physical disease, but there's a lot of emotional issues that go into that, raising a child with a chronic illness. And so that has kind of been my professional career for a long time. And from my own personal healing, when I became a parent, there were a lot of things that came up for me that I really wasn't prepared for, right? Like, they talk so much about, like, the practical aspects of parenting that I was completely blindsided by the emotional pieces of parenting. I thought I knew what I was doing, but I really didn't. So I had to sort of educate myself and do a lot of research and a lot of therapy and all of this to kind of look into my own past and, like, why was I so reactive and why was I struggling so much when I knew in my heart, like, I wanted to parent differently than I was raised, and, like, why was this so difficult? And so that's when I really kind of dug into the um like the childhood emotional neglect and what were the things that were showing up in my parenting that I was struggling with. And I just learned as much as I could about all of that and became very familiar with secure attachment theory and emotional neglect and all of the things that were kind of mysterious to me. It started making a lot of sense. And it also helped me shift my parenting. And so with that, I kind of decided that that was my mission in life, right? From that point on, was to try to help other parents not have to go through as much work as I did, right? And because it's probably been a good 5, 10 years of podcasts, books, therapy, like all the things, like piecing all these things together. And I just started creating content around it a couple of years ago, and then decided I wanted to go all in on creating some coaching around it because I feel like I have something, really worthwhile to offer other moms because healing is relational, right? Like, we can do a lot of reading and we can do the podcasts and stuff, but we also heal in relationship with other people. So having, I've now my son turned 18 a couple weeks ago. So I now have two adult children. And to me, it's like a lot of people find like, what do I do now that my kids are grown? It's like now I can help other moms who were in the trenches like I was, and not have to kind of go through some of the struggles that I did. Um, so that's kind of how that piece of things was developed.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you mentioned too, like that reflection of self, right? Like you had that connection of, I don't want to parent how I was parented. But then it's also like, well, then what other tools do I pull from, right? And you talked about the information that was out there that you were able to consume and now how you're going to give back. I want to dive into this a little bit deeper. So can you tell us a little bit more, like what is emotional safety? And why is that important as like a foundation with our children?
Right. So if you think about emotional safety, think about being heard and seen and accepted, right? For who you are, your authentic self. And so with that, you can be who you really are without being shamed or judged or valued. So a lot of us grew up in an environment where that was not the case. We were met with judgment, like, why are you wearing that? Why are you doing this? Shaming, like, you shouldn't do that. It's bad behavior, those kinds of things. Especially around emotional issues, like, so many of us were shamed for having emotion, which is just literally the human experience, right? And so what happens when there's a Gabor Mate quote that I talk about a lot, like, kids will trade their authenticity for belonging when they feel like when you don't feel like your parent loves and accepts you for who you are, you will start shape shifting. You will start being something that you're not to become accepted by your parent. And so I think many of us can resonate with that. Like if we were shamed for having, expressive personalities or, judged for certain aspects about ourselves, we start getting smaller, right? We start pretending that we're something that we're not. And so basically, what emotional safety is that you don't have to do that stuff. You don't have to put up these protective walls. You don't have to develop these personality traits that kind of help you survive that environment, if that makes sense. And so the reason why it's so important is because when kids feel emotionally safe, that is the foundation for creating a secure attachment. We want secure attachment because that means that then when kids grow up, they're going to have healthy relationships. They're going to have healthy coping, right? Because what we're giving them is the foundation for what the whole rest of their future life looks like. I know that sounds really intense, but parenting is intense. I mean,
Very true.
hopefully, like this, we're raising whole people here. And so our goal is to give them the best set of tools that they can get when they get to adulthood. And so it starts with, healthy relationships, building their self worth. And that's all based on emotional safety and creating secure attachment. Because when kids feel safe and secure at home, they feel safe to go out in the world and kind of explore and be themselves. And when they don't, then that's when we start kind of creating these defensive mechanisms and these coping strategies like hyper independence and self criticism and those kind of things. They, that's how we kind of what we call survive. Right? That was a big, long answer.
No, I think that kind of like paints the full picture too, right? Of that it's not just something like emotional safety is not something that you do at one time. Like it's
No,
something that you have to build day in and day out, be really intentional about as well. And then to your point too of like how we were brought up also influences how we're kind of innately wired to approach emotional safety too.
correct,
So,
correct.
what are some of the ways that, parents might be parenting right now out of those unhealed patterns, even if they have the best intentions? What are some of those actions or things that they might be able to notice in their daily life right now to be like, maybe I need to think about this again?
So I'll give you a great example. Well, people talk about this. Well, actually, I want to go back to something that you said is that there's a lot of intentionality and it's not like a one time event. So emotional safety is built over years. And I want people to know that I know it feels very heavy and a big responsibility. Well, parenting is. However, we really only have to be really attuned to our child's emotions and their needs, like at least, I would say at least 30% of the time, that's what the research says,
Wow.
to create secure attachment. So a lot of parents are, sometimes that gives them a lot of relief because we worry so much. Like that's one of our biggest things with kids. We worry that we're going to mess them up. But as long as you are aware and that you're working to repair things when you don't get it right, because that's going to happen, then you're good, so that hopefully takes a little bit of weight off, is that it's not about being perfect by any means, not at all, but it's about being aware and being in tune. And then when things don't go right, because inevitably they will not. I still get things messed up, and my kids are grown, that you work to repair. Like, and so that's something a lot of us were missing too. Like I can think of a lot of examples when my dad would blow off about something and then come back and pretend like nothing ever happened. It was like, what was that? You know what I mean? Like, okay, even though maybe the parent was in the wrong, like we just never talked about it. So that is very confusing to a child. Anyway, I got off track. What was the question that you asked?
I think you were getting into it, which is like, what are some of those things that like parents could be doing right now
Yeah,
out of those unhealed patterns that, you know, they can be more aware of as they move forward with best intention.
right. So I think one of the biggest things that people can do, and I didn't do this for a long time, is actually be honest about your past. And being on, like actually naming that's, it took me a long, long time to actually say, I experienced childhood emotional neglect because I had this really weird feeling about it. Like somehow I was accusing my parents of not doing their best or whatever. And just noticing your reactivity to things and triggers. You've probably heard that word a lot. When you're feeling this intense, like, your body, you're feeling like you're triggered by something, you're mad. That is a teacher. When we're being triggered, it's teaching us somewhere where we have an unhealed piece, right? I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, actually. But something that used to trigger me so bad is when my kids will relax. And I know that sounds
Mm.
ridiculous, but
Oh, yeah.
I was not I my dad was very regimented, he was very work focused, he was a workaholic, and that's what you did, like, you work and you work, 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 and that was what was rewarded and praised, not resting or chilling or so when my kids would just be having a rest, or I would get so agitated and irritated, and so really that was telling me that, so like, I shouldn't be agitated, my kids are taking a nap or resting or having a fun time. But really what that was the piece of me that was, like, not allowed to do that. And so that's gonna look different for everyone. Everyone's gonna have different triggers, things that, that you weren't allowed to say or do, that you want to provide that experience to your kids, but man, does it trigger you, and you need to figure that out. I was saying getting honest about what you don't want to repeat, and then also just like naming the survival strategies that you have. What did you end up developing out of childhood that was a survival mechanism? Like for me, a lot of it was hyper independence. If I can't depend on somebody to meet my emotional needs, I don't need anybody. And that was the pretending that I did. It was like, oh, I just pretended I didn't care or I didn't need it to protect my heart, because it hurts to feel like somebody's not meeting your emotional needs. And I've got a lot of posts that kind of talk about different aspects of that. There's a lot of different survival mechanisms that we actually think are a personality, but they're not. They're really not who you are. That's what you developed so that you could live. I know, right?
I don't know if I can do the rest of this podcast, Keisha. Like you're just like going so deep. Um, but
But
yeah.
if you can't heal what you don't talk about, you can't change what you don't name. And so unless you're honest and real with yourself, like I experienced childhood emotional neglect. I even still get kind of goosebumps from it. Like saying that out loud many times and just talking about it, it's still hard, but it's helped me to know like so many things that I experienced, like anxiety. Like I thought I was just an anxious person. I thought I was depressed. And those were symptoms, but that's not my personality. I'm not a depressed person. I'm not an anxious person. My anxiety levels have gone way down. Because when you're in survival mode, your nervous system is on high alert all the time. And that's not where we're meant to live. We're not meant to live in this heightened state, all the time. And that's where so many mom that's you were just saying, like, how do people recognize? It's like when you are constantly just that's where burnout kind of comes, is that our nervous system is in this fight or flight state at all times. And that's not where, as humans, like, we're not supposed to live there. Like, fight or flight is literally meant to get you through a situation, like an immediate situation, and then you're supposed to come back down. But what happens is are living up here, and then we have children who have completely undeveloped nervous systems and regulation, like no regulation and emotions everywhere. And it just throws us up like into this constant. I mean, so that's where I've talked about, like, what is really mom overall. I wrote a post about this quite a while ago that talked about, like, mom rage is really just us being in a hyper, nervous system state that we're not meant to live in all the time. And it's just constantly triggered because we have children who developmentally just aren't, they're just not regulated. They're not, they're very emotional beings, and they're just being children, literally. Um, but it's very triggering to somebody who's got a nervous system that they're just all over the place, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think too, I'm a former public school teacher and we would talk a lot about the time of like modeling or practicing behavior in those situations. Like we have fire drills not when there's a fire that's actually
Right.
happening. We have fire drills to prepare for if this was to happen. We know the procedure and the process for it.
Right.
And so, I want to dive into this a little bit more too when it comes to thinking about the way that we were parented. And in those moments where it feels like something is on fire, what do we default to? So you had mentioned, parenting well doesn't come naturally. What comes naturally is how you were raised. So can you unpack that a little bit more for our listeners?
Well, for one, I hope that I hope that gives people a little bit of relief. Kind of like, you only need to be getting things right at least 30% of the time to create secure attachment. Because there's a lot of weight in parenting. You feel so, I mean, you are so responsible, but it just feels heavy sometimes. And so if there's anything I can do to help people feel a little bit lighter around that, hopefully this is it. And I lost the question because I already started talking and my mind got ahead of myself. What did you tell me what you said again? I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So you often say that parenting well doesn't come naturally. What comes naturally is how you were raised.
Right. And so when we're kids, our nervous system and all of that, our brains, they're just not formed. And it's formed by our experiences. So if we were raised in a critical and shameful environment, if we were punished for things all the time, if we did not have emotional safety, our nervous system literally gets wired to that. And so we don't have the healthy coping mechanisms. We so this was sort of my experience, is that the desire to parent differently didn't get me what the results that I wanted. I had to literally do, nervous system work. I had to learn how to calm and regulate myself, because I would just spiral, like you said, to things that weren't really an emergency. I was just constantly in this reactive state and defensive a lot. And that's because that's how I was wired, right? So it's sort of like an unlearning, honestly. There's a lot of things that we have to unlearn. And that's kind of where reparenting comes in. People say, what is reparenting? If you did not grow up with emotional safety and get secure attachment, and I did not, I mean, I formerly affiliate myself with an anxious attachment, but I've worked on healing that. And just so you know, 50% of people, at least 50% of people, do not have secure attachment. So that is not an uncommon thing. So if that is you, then that is very typical. Um, so we have to unlearn that stuff. Like, I have to unlearn all the things that came with the anxious attachment and then teach myself the secure attachment stuff for myself, because I'm an adult now. So nobody's going to give that to me. I have to sort of teach that to myself. Um, and it also does heal in healthy relationships. So, like, working with a therapist or a coach, when you can work with somebody who can show up for you and create a safe space for you, it does create a healing environment for you to work it. Because, like, oh, I can trust people. I can trust people to show up. This person does care about me. They're reflecting back to me, healthy patterns and things like that. And so that's what I mean. Like, parenting well doesn't come naturally unless you came from, a situation where you had parents that were attuned to you, that were um, providing you that secure attachment. It's likely that you're going to have some things to unlearn and relearn to show up in the way that you would like to show up for your kids. It's not just going to come naturally, which is sort of a blessing and a curse in a way, because it's like we have this assumption that parenting comes naturally, and it just doesn't. So I know there's a lot of moms who feel a lot of guilt and shame because they think, well, how come I'm not better at this? Well, no wonder. I mean, if you grew up in an environment where this stuff wasn't provided to you, how would you know how to provide that to someone else? It's like you can't learn, I mean, you said you were a teacher. You can't learn multiplication before you learn, subtraction and the basics. So, how can you teach something that you never were taught?
Exactly. Right. And then, like, to that fire drill analogy too, like, if you were never taught how to actually evacuate the building for a fire drill, when the fire actually happens and it's in your face, what do? You don't know.
Right. And that's
You haven't
like
practiced.
literally what's happening when your kids are melting down and your body's going, oh, shit. I don't know what to do because you don't.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
nobody modeled that for you, if nobody modeled that, hey, that co-regulation, it's okay. I see that you're having really big feelings right now. If nobody modeled that for you, how are you going to know how to do that for somebody else?
Yes.
You can't even do it for yourself. I mean,
That's like step one, right? Is learning how to do it for yourself first. And then you can, they say oxygen mask, put it on you before putting it on.
yes,
Like,
yes,
we have to take care of
I
ourselves as a parent. For
right.
one.
I think I've given that analogy before. Like, you have to, it starts with you. And that's what sort of drives me nuts about some of the old parenting. We are getting away from this, but so much of the old parenting tips and things we're so much focused on the behavior of the child. And we're really moving away from that because we know that so if you think about it too, like social norms, it was like people used to think good parenting meant you had well-behaved kids. That was sort of the thing. And so they focused on, well, how do I get my kid to behave? Well, we did it by doing controlling, shaming, punishing, like literally controlling, our kids. And we kind of saw what was a result of that. We had a huge generation full of anxious, people pleasing, depressed, mental health
Yeah.
problems. Yeah, I know. I mean, probably everybody here can resonate with something, on that level. And so we now recognize that. And again, I want to clarify that this is not permissive parenting. This isn't my kids run all over me and I just give that is not it at all. Like, my kids knew, and they could tell you now, like, there were boundaries, there were expectations, there were rules. But there was a lot of love and there was a lot of acceptance and a lot of talking and repairing. Um, but yeah, it's definitely not permissive. And that's where I think a lot of people kind of question or wonder. And it's not that at all. It's how do I build I put a I did a thread yesterday. I saw a post that talked about, like, if your kids can come to you about anything and fill with their mess, basically their humanness, without and they're met with safety and not shame, you are doing something right. Right. Because we want to model that humanity for our kids. Like, I grew up thinking, like, my parents walked on water, they could do no wrong. They were the parent, they were the authority figure and all this. Well, come to find out, they're just people like the rest of us, but I never saw that. And so
Yeah.
it's been messy, and my kids have seen me in some really, not so good times, but I also want to model for them that, like, this is how I handle it when I'm struggling. Um, because when there's this huge, I guess, power differential and you don't see that human side of your parents, you, I don't know. I'm trying to think of the words to say it, but um, you think then that you need to be perfect. You think that, yeah, and that is so, parenting is messy as hell. It's one of the hardest, messiest things I've ever done, but it's been one of the best things in my life. I really would not be the person I am today if I had not had my kids. They have been so healing in so many ways. And you're a mom of six. They just have shown me areas that I needed to grow and heal. And I'm grateful for that. As hard as hard as it is, I can't think, like I needed that. My heart needed that. My soul needed those pieces.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned too, like this kind of focus and redefinition of like good parenting is focused on connection. And I think, as someone who like I never remember seeing my dad cry or anything, but also I
No.
think like a word that comes to mind is like authenticity, right? Like we are all authentically living the human experience. And when it's shown a specific way, and this is like same for social media too, right? Like social media has given us the impression that you can snap your fingers and the room is clean. But this authenticity that comes with the messiness and the learning of parenting and like the collaboration around like we're on the same goal. Like I want what's best for you, you want what's best for you. Like how can we come together and like help us make those steps forward in an authentic way? Like not inauthentic of like, okay, great, like here's step one, step two, step three, like rote memorization or anything,
Right.
but we're gonna be there. We're gonna have those tough conversations and, the connection, I think, is what we're as you mentioned, like, where we're headed with parenting. So, are there any everyday practices or mindset shifts that parents can adopt to be more connected during those tough moments when maybe, like, the fire alarm is going off, we've got a fire going on, we've got, dinner or baseball practice coming up. What are some of those, like, moments in that or strategies for those moments that parents can then maybe pull from, to be more connected to their kids?
Well, I think that one of the biggest things that, as far as a skill that we need to learn for ourselves as parents, is self compassion, right? Because if you weren't ever taught to sit with your emotions, then how are you going to expect your kids to be able to sit with theirs, right? And so we have to remember that we're learning, we're not failing, that we're not like it all goes back to that imperfection. Um, and I'll give a little plug for Brene because you know that I have to plug Brene every time. But that was a big turning point for me when I read her book called The Gifts of Imperfection. I even have the little guidepost for wholehearted living still up on, see it right there on my refrigerator. Um, it kind of was that it was a very first permission slip that I gave myself that I do not have to do this perfectly. It's also where where my Instagram handle, my coaching business name came from, was Wholehearted Parenting. It's based around the principles of wholehearted living, which means that we are all messy humans and that we are gonna show up and we're gonna show up with our messy and perfect selves because I want my kids to know that they can make mistakes, that they can learn from them. They're not expected to be, straight A students. Are not expected to be, this, that, or the other thing. They just have to show up in who they are. But starting with self-compassion has been so hard for me. I was so self-critical. Um, and recognizing that. And so again, like how do you model that for your kids if you're not giving it to yourself? So self-compassion, Kristen Neff has a great, if you want to know where you fall on the self-compassion scale, she has a free quiz on her website. It's very eye-opening to learn about like just how self-critical that many of us are. And just remember, like parenting is messy. You are going to mess up. And that's not the point. The point isn't that you're not trying to avoid messing up. It's what you do when that happens. It's repair, 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 repair. I mean, this happened to me the other day. My son did something and had been really stressed lately and I kind of blew up on him about something that was fairly minor and he called me out on it and I was able to be more and more the more I do it, the more quickly I can come to it. But I was like, okay, you're right. I really overreacted and I'm really sorry for that, and then doing better next time. And also just like lead with curiosity. Always lead with curiosity, like instead of critical, like especially so we often want to just go right to the what's wrong
Mhm.
with, what are you doing? Stop that, or what's wrong with you or whatever. But we always want to know like why, what are you feeling right now? How am I feeling? How is my kid feeling right now? Get curious. My therapist says that a lot too. Get curious because it leaves things open. Because when you're critical, you're sort of already making a judgment in your mind. Like if you're curious, you're asking questions, and that's going to make your kids want to talk more about it. Whereas if you're kind of just coming in with this preconceived judgment, um, they're probably going to shut down. And honestly, when we have a good connection, the behavior and all those other things, like they sort of flush out. Like if your kid doesn't feel safe coming to you, like their behavior is going to reflect that. And that's oftentimes why we continue to see those kind of behaviors. And you probably saw that in a classroom too. But when we have a good connection, the tougher stuff is a little easier. I mean, think about it. If just think about someone in your life, like I don't know, some people don't have a boss that they feel comfortable talking to, or there's somebody that's scary or they walk on eggshells with. Like, do you think you're gonna resolve issues very well, or they're gonna like if you're having to have this kind of relationship with someone, how do you think your behavior is around that person? It's weird. It's you're not authentic. And that's the same thing with your kids. We want to let kids know that like all emotions are fine.
Mhm.
Like nothing is shameful. Every emotion is safe. Like we don't want them to fear certainly like don't be angry. I grew up with like don't be angry all the time. And so no wonder as an adult like I shame myself when I get an angry response. You know what I mean? And that's where I've kind of talked about like how those things show up for us in adulthood is that all those messages that we got as a kid, like they don't just blow away because we became adults. Like they literally live in our body, and they come up. And so if nothing else, we want to give our kids permission to feel, right? Feeling all the feelings is okay. Now, how we react to that is another story. Like it's okay to feel all angry. It's okay to feel all the things. Now, it's not okay to kick your brother those kind of things, but it's safe to feel whatever it is you're feeling.
And like the validation too in those moments of like, I can see that you're frustrated, or how are you feeling? It looks like you're frustrated, right? Like the curiosity piece too of like maybe they're not frustrated, maybe they're just really focused on something, and then it could turn into a spiral. I know that was one of my experiences in the classroom was like I would jump to the judgment of how they were feeling based on what I was seeing, but they were just like tired, or
Sure.
they were processing through like being hungry and it wasn't always as much as I had felt like it was loaded. Um,
Well, and also when you lead with curiosity and you ask open-ended questions, you're starting to help them develop emotional language and starting to feel comfortable naming and talking about their experiences instead of you putting words in their mouth, which
yep.
I know is tempting to do sometimes as a parent, but um you're helping them, you're building that emotional vocabulary. Something that I work with kids a lot too is talking about like when you want to talk about how an emotion feels in your body, like where do you feel anger? Like how do you get sweaty in the arms? Does your stomach bulge? Does your face make, does your face like this? We want for kids to be able to identify that because when emotions are taught to be suppressed, you don't even know. I mean, there's probably a lot of adults sometimes that now, like, I don't even know how I feel right now. I'm so confused, because they were taught to like suppress everything except for the good stuff, like be happy,
Right. And then that's like the
That's why I love those pictures of like, this is the reality of a photo shoot and this is the photo shoot. Like reality is that everybody's jumping off the wall and whatever. And then there's the perfect Instagram curated photo.
right, right. Oh my goodness. Well, as we wrap up, we have a little segment because at Launch Family we've created a parenting guide called Emmy. So she's
Okay.
like the on-call support system for navigating modern family life. Moms can ask for anything from emotional challenges to school routines. So before we go, I have two questions from moms that are actually asking, and I want to get your take on it as someone who's been in the trenches too. So
Ooh,
the
okay.
first question is so fun. The first question is it normal to feel resentment when healing old wounds while raising your own kids? So any advice on how to handle like complicated emotions while still moving forward?
Um, The short answer to that is yes. It is completely normal, and I, to this day, still have some mixed emotion. I mean, I think that's, again, like we talk about the human experience, is that it's sad to think about, man, why did that happen to me? Or why couldn't have my parents shown up differently? Like, it's hurtful. And sometimes resentment can actually come up, not really towards your kids, but like, okay, it's a mixed bag. Like, I'm giving my kids this experience that I didn't have, and then it just brings that resentment up. Like, why didn't I get this? That is totally normal. Um, because showing up for your kids in a way that people didn't show up for you is hard. Again, like I was talking to or about earlier, like name it
Mhm.
for what it is. I'm angry. I'm resentful about this, right? It doesn't make you a bad person or a parent, makes you a human,
Mhm.
right? To just say, this is how I felt. It's normal when you had an unmet need and maybe boundaries were crossed, and that you were parented in a way that you don't feel like you should have been. So again, part of it is the curiosity piece kind of comes in again, like what part of me has felt overlooked or abandoned, or like what am I giving right now that I never received? And just being gentle with yourself, honestly, about those parts. Like, it's so normal.
Yeah. I think too, like
Again,
early adulthood too, like when we get into adolescence, my personal experience with this was, I didn't have a close relationship with my mom. And so when everyone in college was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go hang out with my mom, I was like, great, well, I'll be here, you
well,
know?
that's awesome.
Well,
I
that's
know my
what
sister
moms
talks about that too. Like, she joined a sorority, and she's still an advisor for the sorority. And she sent me a message not that long ago that was like, I really wonder what it would have been like to have a mom that showed up in this way. Like, unfortunately, my mom lost her mom when she was very, very young. And so she didn't have that. And again, it's not that people are necessarily bad.
do.
My parents aren't bad people. They just grew up in a very, very different generation and didn't, the tools are very, very different. But that also doesn't mean it didn't leave an impact on you. So that's what's hard too. It's like
Both sides.
we notice and we know that our parents grew up in a very, very different time and things were different, but it still left an impact. But like you said, that could come up too. It's like you are somewhere and there's all these women with their moms, and then you're like, hey.
Yeah.
That can kind of bring up a lot.
Yeah. Or like
too.
call on your village and you're like, where's my village? Like, who do I
Right, because
call
there's
on?
also this assumption that, like, when I become a mom, I'm gonna have a mom that can support me
Yeah.
through the parent, and maybe you don't have that.
Yeah. And so then maybe even looking for like alternative ways to kind of fill that in, like whether that's a friend or an aunt or, maybe one of your in-laws or something like that can kind of help fill that gap for you and kind of help repair a little bit of that brokenness. That was,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I was saying earlier, healing happens in relationships, and so it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be a named family person. It can be someone that you decide is your family.
yeah.
I have a lot of sisters, and you sometimes have to create your own village. And yeah, it's maybe a little harder because it's not built in, but it's people that you feel aligned and authentic with. And so that's what's the most important thing, not a title. But again, that's all social expectations too. Like, there's all these images of what family is supposed to look like. And, we're supposed to have this mom who's leading us through motherhood. And, for some people, it's not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. And social media can just kind of fuel that as well.
Yeah.
Constant access to anything that you may be, insecure about or, experiencing in different capacities. Ugh, it's a
I know.
blessing and a curse. With information that's out there, we have more tools, but also we have a lot more things to compare to
Right, right.
than we've had before. So the last question is, how do I parent differently when my partner grew up in a very different household than I did? What tips do you have for navigating parenting differences within a partnership?
Well, that's a good question. because I had
You have a
divorced.
kid that
I raised my kid without a partner. I mean, we had to co-parent. So, I mean, technically we weren't married, but we did have to co-parent. So I think it's important to probably have, I mean, you have to have some honest conversations. Talking about what is important to you and why. Like, hey, this is talk about values more than like methods, like thinking about like what are our values? Where are we aligned on our values? Like, you know what? Some I had to just remember that my kid's dad was going to do things differently than the way I was.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it was. But we always agreed on values, like what is important to us in terms of values. So that's an important shift. Don't get so hung up maybe on how they're doing it, but like where your values are leading you. Making sure that you're agreeing on like what's non-negotiable. I mean, because some stuff really isn't. Is it something to get into an argument about? I mean, think about like what's non-negotiable and then like making sure that you're talking about this stuff outside of the event. Because like when you're in the middle of a meltdown or something is not the time for you guys to be hashing out like your differences or like, making sure that you're talking and communicating along the way. That's something that my kid's dad and I did a lot is that we just did a lot of communicating. Um before things happened. Like, how would we wanna handle this? Or, what's our value on that? And, so then that made navigating the hard parts easier because 'cause we'd already had discussions about it. Um, and again, I'll say it for the 10th time today, curiosity.
Oh,
Curiosity. I mean,
yeah.
get curious about your partner's upbringing and, like, what is important to them and you know, you guys can reflect on each other's stuff. I mean, it is actually a an opportunity for growth. I mean, it doesn't have to be contention. It can be an opportunity for growth. But it is important to share though. Like I was saying, like in the heat of the moment or the time comes, it's not the time for you guys to kind of hash out all that stuff. Tell me how like how you and your husband have I'm just curious, like how
Yeah, I mean, we both grew up in very different households. Both children of divorce at a young age, and I have a half sister. He has four full siblings,
oh,
but then a bunch of half siblings and step siblings and things like that on his side. So when we have had these conversations, it's been a lot about, well, what did we like about our childhood? What did we not like about the way that we were raised in our childhood? Okay, well, what are some things that we can work on together to kind of like shift this narrative for our own children? Oh, and it is a daily struggle still. Like there's times when I'm like, I can't believe and in my like metacognition, I was saying this out loud in front of my children. I'm like, I can't believe he reacted that way. Like that was like an overreaction to something that happened. Like it's just a spill. Like go wipe it up. Like it's not the end of the world. But then
right,
in his household, like that would have been something that he needed to be orderly and be way and um this kind of realization too of like we have work to do. Like we're not perfect. And we kind of built in this reflection sort of period too of like, oh, we did this earlier, I think next time we should try it this way instead and kind of see how that goes better. And, we have a logistical challenges with six children because they're all parented differently.
yes.
We have our, sensitive kiddo and our definite like leader and our 2-year old. I think she runs the whole house, honestly. Like she just got it all down in an order. Um, but it is those kind of that consistent communication and like the curiosity for like what else can we try to see if we're able to kind of like shift the ship, so to speak, a little bit like more gracefully than like yes or no. Like there's no black and white in our household. It's like there's gray.
Right,
We're gonna ask for clarification and have those conversations. But that is also because we didn't have that experience and we are intentional about like, we don't have all the answers as the parents. Please don't hold us accountable to having all of the answers because we're right along this journey with you.
right. And
So,
I think what you said is super important. Just because you guys were raised differently, again, we're back to it doesn't mean that we have to be perfect or that we're aligned completely on
mhm,
everything, but it does require that we can communicate. that we're respectful, and that we're both committed to raising our kids on the values that are important to us. When you kind of have those basics, then I feel like you can navigate some of the nuanced stuff a little easier.
Yeah, I think you like really put that succinctly. I could carry on forever talk about
Oh, I know.
parenthood life, motherhood and emotion. But Keisha, this has been such an incredible conversation. I truly want to thank you for the honesty, wisdom, and heart that you poured into everything that we discussed today. Your personal journey reminds us that doing the work to heal ourselves isn't just for us, but it's actually like this generational gift that we actually pass down to our children. So if you've loved today's conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and check the show notes to connect with Keisha and explore more of her wholehearted parenting resources. Remember, healing isn't perfect, parenting isn't perfect, but when we choose connection over control, authenticity over appearance, and love over fear, we're doing the most important work of all. So until next time, keep growing, keep healing, and keep showing up.
Awesome.